All right. So this morning, I'm going to wrap up our series um, on this month's theme, Awakening Your Spiritual Power. We started out the month with kind of the process of breaking things down and putting them back together. And then we went into kind of the creative process and how do we make choices and how do we frame our choices and do that kind of a thing. And then last week, Reverend Jill picked up with, we've learned enough through suffering. And how do we break that cycle and make different choices? And so this week, I kind of looked at all of that and wanted to look at how do we go about looking at this process. I looked at everything that we have been taking on with this idea of awakening our power. And looking at that and saying, you know what, we have this power, we have this presence, this atmosphere that operates within us and through us and as us each and every moment. And it's always moving, it's always happening. Its nature is to expand and move and grow and move through us and surround us and take on shape and form and substance as our experience. All of that, as we teach, in accord with what we believe, truly believe. And like a friend of mine reminded me of as we were talking on the phone yesterday, he was talking about, some friends of his, and he described them as this. He says, they don't just have faith, Lee, they know. And how often do we talk about that? I don't have faith that the sun is going to rise in the morning. I just know that it will. There's no question in my mind that the sun's coming up in the morning. Even though I may not even see it. It may be hidden by the clouds, but I know it's there. Or the moon rise. Or the tides rising and falling. Or any number of other things that we simply know happen. We simply know that they are. So as we move through this talk here this morning, this message this morning, thank you for that. Yes, message, not talk. Keep all that in mind. Keep all that in mind, because how we frame the process in terms of our thought, in terms of our belief, in terms of our thinking, our knowing, how we frame what is happening in our world makes all the difference. Makes all the difference. So begin with this first quote this morning from Tom Robbins. And he writes this: our greatest human adventure is the evolution of consciousness. We are in this life to enlarge the soul, liberate the spirit, and light up the brain. To enlarge the soul, liberate the spirit, and light up the brain. I like that last one too. Light up the brain. Growth is always going on. We can agree that change is always happening. And because of that growth, we change. And because of the change, we grow. It's a very symbiotic system. They work hand in hand. Learning and growing and changing is always happening. What drives our experience of that is what is our relationship to change? How do I feel about change? How do I feel about learning and growing? Now, in some areas of my life, it's very easy for me to accept change. In other areas of my life, not so much. I had this is kind of a funny one this week. So this last week I went back to work. Change. I went back to my day job, my full time, you know, not 9 to 5, but more like 4 a.m. to 12:30, 1 o'clock. Now I've been off for 6 weeks, and so I've been out of my rhythm. I've been out of my cycle of the way I do things. I kind of at that time of the morning, I have a very habitual way of going through things to make sure everything happens. Typically, this week I worked from the office worked from home on Monday, got kind of stuff, things organized and caught up on email and that kind of thing. Tuesday, I went out into the field for the first time in 6 weeks. Got up, got dressed, pulled things together, grabbed my stuff, went out to the van, got in the van, drove down the highway about 20 minutes, and all of a sudden I noticed my feet felt funny. I had gotten in the van in my socks and sandals. No steel toes. No steel toes, as is expected. So I was way too far down the road to turn around and go back, so I had to, wait till the stores open, and I bought another pair of shoes to get me through the rest of the day. Now, I could have gotten really cranky about that. I could have gotten, if I was the real self-critical type, I could have gotten really upset with me about that. Sometimes I am that self-critical, but in this case, no. In this case, it was like, okay, silly goose, get on with your day, get some shoes, and move on. And actually, the first stop, I kind of made a joke out. Like, and they hadn't even noticed, quite honestly, that the team in the hospital, not a big deal. Point being, it's about how am I with change? How am I handling that? Am I going to get so attached to the way things are that I am, how tempted am I to allow what Emerson calls, allow my bloated nothingness to gum up the divine circuits? Am I getting in my own way? Am I so attached to the way things are that I can't allow change and growth that is for my good to happen? Am I stopping myself? Am I short-circuiting me in my thinking? Alan Watts writes, the only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. Join the dance. How many of us are willing to really dive in and join the dance of change? Because quite honestly, at this point, that's the only dance there is. If I'm about dancing with life, if I'm about dancing with spirit, I'm about dancing with change. Because this change is always happening, always going on. It is the sole constant in the universe. And so how do I feel about that? Can I get excited about it? When something happens in the world and the phrase comes up, now what? Am I saying now what with a frown on my face? Or am I saying now what with a smile on my face? It's like, oh, now what? Or is it, all right, now what? What is it in your world? I can honestly say, probably, yeah, now what? Happens, sure. And now what with a smile? Oh boy, what's next? That can happen too. And what is the frame of mind that allows me to have that experience with a smile on my face? What makes that difference? What makes the difference is what I expect. How am I viewing my life? How am I viewing my world? How do I view the natural course of events? Am I trusting that love as the sole and prime creative force in the universe, that is driving everything? That creative expansion and growth and happiness, that is the drive, that is the experience that I am expecting in life. And I know sometimes that's challenging. If I lose a job, if I get sick, if I fall and, bruise myself, something happens to my car, when all of a sudden everything seems to be going wrong and the universe seems to be conspiring against me, how do I shift that? It takes work. It takes being attentive. It takes being mindful about what the conversation is going on in my head. Affirmations work, meditation works, prayer, spiritual mind treatment and affirmative prayer work to help shift the consciousness and to begin step by step changing the way I'm thinking, to shift my mental equivalence from saying, man, the life is just after me, from that kind of a position, saying, you know what? Life is for me. The universe is working for me on my behalf, and it is answering yes to the desires of my heart when I stay focused on that, when I continue to give attention to that, and allow that to be the dominant focus of attention for me day in, day out. I have a pair of quotes from Ernest Holmes about this. He starts, "Do I see life limited to the eternal round of getting up in the morning, eating, going to work, coming home, going to bed, sleeping, getting up again, and so on?" He says, do I see life limited to that? And then he follows up with, break the bonds, he says, of apparent necessity and see life as one continuous expression of the infinite spirit. And as this conception gradually dawns upon the inner thought, something will happen in the inner conditions to relieve the greater demands of necessity. He says something will happen. The change will happen when we begin to see life as a continuous expression of the infinite spirit. And that the core nature of that infinite spirit is for growth, is for expansion, is for an ever-expanding expression of itself as us. As the goodness and truth and love and joy that we say is our desire. Abundance, health, wholeness, prosperity, all of that is seeking that expansion of expression through us. And we make room for that. And we look at these events that may seem contrary to that as opportunities to let go of the beliefs that say, you know what, I'm not good enough, life's not working for me, life's not happening for me. They keep telling me, we keep learning that life is working for us and supporting us and saying yes and yes and yes and yes and yes, but I'm just not seeing it. And part of that conversation is saying, I'm just not seeing it, I'm just not getting it. And I get trapped in this downward spiral of I'm not good enough, I don't deserve this, I've made too many mistakes, I've done too much bad in my life, blah, 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 blah. letting go of that, turning the page on that, drawing a line in the sand of my own consciousness to say no. All of that has gone to create the good person that I am today, and I've learned from all that, and I get to move forward. I get to be different. I get to live differently. I get to express differently. I get to have the good stuff. I get to experience the good relationships. I get to know and trust and believe and have an experience of all my needs being met and exceeded. I have enough prosperity. I have enough in my bank account to pay my bills, to go out and play, to give some money away and support the causes that really excite me and lift me up. I get to do all of that. Because why? Because I am worthwhile. Because I've taken the time to turn towards the challenges that I've had in my life and say, you know what? Okay, I've learned from this. I'm now better than all of this. Ernest Holmes goes on to say this. He says, as we bring ourselves to a greater vision, we induce greater concept and thereby demonstrate more in our experience. In this way, there is a continuous growth and unfoldment taking place. A simple analogy would be, you know what? I keep going to the well of my own good with a bigger and bigger bucket. And eventually that bucket turns into a hose. And it changes from a garden hose to a fire hose. And then I get the pump out and it's just constant and it flows. The good flows. Because I enlarge my concept. I enlarge my idea of how much good I am worthy of. And as we slowly, gently enlarge that concept of what is ours, of what we're worthy of, guess what? We begin experiencing it too. And the way gets made clear for how we get there. We begin telling a different story about who we are, about what our experience is. We begin telling a different story about what our lives are. Like we are to keep our conversations in heaven, so to speak. That's not to say that we don't have our down times. That's not to say that we don't have our emotional times where we are letting go of the things that have held us back. We have our feelings, we have our emotions, we have our tears, we have our rage moments. The trick is in having them and letting them go, having them and turning the page, right? So that we're no longer holding on to it. We have the moments and then we move on. We have the moments that we say, okay, now what's next? With a smile. Where do I get to go from here? I get to make different choices. I get to give attention to different ideas. Ideas that are no longer holding me back, ideas that are no longer limiting me, but ideas that are limitless. Ideas that are filled with what's possible rather than what's missing. You see the difference there? That difference between, man, it's just not here. What's missing? What's missing? What's missing? And we can shift from what's missing to what's possible. That's where ideas come up. That's a frame of mind. That's a framework that says something is possible, and what is it? What can I do from here? And being willing to just sit in the question long enough for the answer to show up. Not forcing it, not pushing it, being willing to be just a little bit in that empty space. Because that empty space is a space of possibility. That empty space is where creativity happens, where a little bit of childlike joy and wonder can happen. Or maybe I start thinking outside the box, or maybe I just, push the sides of the box down and say, you know what, don't need a box. I can just let it all go. And be willing to just be empty enough so that an idea that maybe I've never even considered can show up. Possibility thinking and feeling. Sometimes it can be challenging in the dark times to be willing to look for the good. Sometimes we have to start with just being grateful for the fact that I wake up in the morning, that I have breath in my lungs, that I have roof over my head, that I have food on my table, that I have friends I can count on, and begin stacking those things one on the other, on the other, on the other. 2 things, 3 things, 5 things, 10 things. Soon I've got 100 things that I'm grateful for in my life. One upon the other, upon the other, upon the other. And that's the way I can shift. That's the way I can move and learn and grow. That's the way I can expand that bucket of good that I'm willing to accept by saying, wow, I do have a lot to be grateful for. There is good in my world. We start small and build from there. Turning the page is where we can both embrace what is and hold space for what's possible at the same time. Where we accept our good, celebrate our awareness that says, you know what, there is an activity of spirit, there is a presence of love here. I may not feel real joyful in the moment, but I know that in time I can turn this page and embrace something greater. I can begin looking for the good. I can begin expecting that change is happening, knowing that that change is always for my good. Because I am keeping my mind and my attention and my intention on this idea that life is working for me, that life is saying yes to the desires of my heart. And those are the things that make all the difference. All the difference. And that will lead us to our practice for this week, which is this. So this week we start the day looking in the mirror and asking the question, what's possible today? What's possible today? We may get an answer right away, or we may simply allow ourselves to be in the question and hold space for something serendipitous to occur. We're not always going to get an answer right away. Sometimes we have to live in the question. I should say have to. Sometimes we get to live in the question. And that means we get to walk around with a sense of expecting something good. Okay? Or expecting an answer. So that is our practice for the day, for this week. So with that, now it's your turn. Questions, comments, answers, responses? to any of it. And people online, I am monitoring the chat as we speak. So if you have a question online, you can type it into the chat. Go ahead, Victoria.
Yeah, we had a lovely young lady come into our life this last week, and she lives that principle. 3 years ago, she went through a divorce, and so she decided she didn't like her job. She was going to quit her job, and she wanted to see, she's from Poland. She wanted to see every state. So she started out with no job, no belongings, just a car, and she goes on faith like Peace Pilgrim.
Oh.
She just goes, and I mean, I was flabbergasted. And she's lovely. So she's filling in for our lovely housekeeper. She comes to Arizona, and our housekeeper says, "Well, I'm going to Poland for 3 months. You can stay in my house, and you can do my clients." So that's how I met Grace. So she said one time she got on the plane to go see her mom who was ill in Poland. She had $60 to her name. Well, you can hardly get a cab to go from the airport to wherever, but she said it always works out. She said, when I get someplace, I don't know anyone, I drive in, stop at a restaurant or something always happens. And I thought, that's what you're talking about. So, how amazing that is.
Wonderful. Thank you, Victoria. All right. Anybody else? Okay. All right, then. We will wrap it up there. All right. Let's take this all to, let's take it all to spirit. Let's go inside and practice this principle. So in the consciousness here established, we recognize the one power and presence that is spirit. An infinite love and life and joy that surrounds us and folds us right here, right now. Truly, we are it. And each and every one of us, an individualized expression of this divine and infinite presence. And so as we move forward into the rest of this day, we know this truth for each and every one of us here in the space. Everybody listening, watching online, we are so very grateful. And we know and trust right now that we simply turn the page and allow ourselves to be present right where we are. Knowing that this infinite life is working for us, for our good, supporting us right here and right now, and we celebrate it. We celebrate this knowing. Letting go of everything that has gone before so that we can be present with what is here right now. Letting go of all sense of lack or limitation that we may have had up until this point. Knowing that we are infinite love and truth expanding in its expression through us, as us, right here, right now. That wholeness, health, abundance, and prosperity are our divine birthright, and we experience it and accept it and celebrate it now. Now, now, now. And I know for anybody here in this space, anybody watching online now or later, that if there is a desire, if there is a need, if there is something we need to let go of, that is done right now. That wholeness and health are our birthright, that right and perfect employment are the truth of our experience, that prosperity and wholeness and abundance are our experience of life right now. That right relationships are harmonious, loving, joyful, and joy-filled. That communication is clear and loving and caring. All this and so much more. Divine love and wisdom guide and direct each and every one of us in this moment and every moment. Each and every one of us hearing the sound of my voice is truly blessed and a blessing. That wherever they are, whatever they are doing, our friends, our family, our community, truly all those in this world are truly uplifted in love to see very, very clearly the truth of who and what we are as a human family. Each and every one, a divine expression of love. And so with gratitude, we go forward knowing that all is well, that life is good and very good as each and every one of us. And so we let it be, and so it is.